Hello everyone, my name is Lewis. Welcome back to the channel. I hope I find you all in good health. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the jazz albums I've been listening to recently. I'm going to talk about each album in turn and why I would recommend each one of these albums to you. So straight out of the gate is a 1977 release by a group called Oracy, and the album is called The Positive Force. There we go. That's a nice cover. It's interesting. This album was accompanied by a lovely set of sleeve notes. It was really super interesting. So well done for the packaging there. I like this album. As you know, I've got a soft spot for spiritual jazz, and this certainly lends itself to it. But there are problems with this album, and I'll try and explain in just a moment. This is a really nice example of jazz poetry and that kind of slice of life narrative which can be found on some of the spiritual jazz albums of this era. So yeah, I certainly did enjoy the journey. I would not put this album on the same level as Tapscott's The Call or Strachan's Soul Translation. I wouldn't say, yeah. I neither think it's the same standard. Okay, what the issue is that you would be comparing chalk and cheese or apples with oranges. They're not quite the same thing. This is quite a standalone album, or yeah, it's not quite like those two. So, but that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. For me, at least, A Positive Force is a pleasant mashup of the following elements, in my opinion. Writer James Baldwin, the presentation of Gil Scott-Heron, and some of the quips of comedian Pigmeat Markham. Now, if you've never heard of Pigmeat Markham, look him up on YouTube. It's of a particular era, and yeah, it's an experience. This album is a journey paved with good intentions, and I certainly do appreciate that, because there was obviously budgetary issues as well as technical expertise issues. But I'm super glad to have this album. Super glad to have to know that it exists. So yeah, what I am saying is with conditions. But yes, I have to address the elephant in the room in regards to this album, and that is the recording is terrible. It really is terrible by modern standards. Even by 1977 standards, it's terrible. But that's to do with budgetary issues as well as just experience, as whether it's the producer or the musicians themselves. This is a kind of like, this is an amateur affair, so I'm going to give them full credit for taking on the challenge and doing the best they could in the circumstances as it presented itself to them at that time. So respect to you. But I can't help feeling at the same time that the story of how this album came into existence is probably a bit more interesting than the album itself. And I don't mean to throw shade there, like I'm, picking on this album, because I certainly not, because I have it in my hands. I've paid good money for it because I did enjoy it. But I think the backstory of how this came into existence is even more interesting than the album itself. So yeah, when you do have a listen, check them out. You can find out a bit about the band themselves, the context of how this, how they all came together, what they were trying to achieve. I think they really did a really good job. So I want to congratulate them at the same time. And I don't want it to take my comments unkindly, because I certainly don't mean it that way. The tracks that I would recommend from this album would be African in Winter, Praise Song, and the third track would be The Weight Don't Make Things No Lighter. Yeah, I really do like the title of that. Notables on this album would be Malaka Wachunga on vocals, who done a really good job on there. So congratulations all round for the people involved in this project. you tried your best, and I certainly do appreciate that, and that's why I spent good money on this. So this is the first album. The second album today is a problematic album for me, and I will explain that. It's a 1978 release by Koichi Matsukaze, and the album is called Earth Mother. So yeah, I do like this cover. I like the Japanese font there, and I quite like Mr. Matsukaze's image here, and he looks a bit confused, a bit out there. And when I first saw this album, I thought to myself, why is he like, why doesn't he pose a bit better than that? And once I came to listen to the album, I found myself on having the same expression as he did once I had listened to this album a few times. So it's no accident, and I'll explain why. So yeah, this is an energetic outing infused with absolutely first-rate technical excellence. Can't deny the musicianship on show here. It's just unbelievable. But to be honest, I respect this album more than I love it as an emotional response, and hopefully you'll understand what I mean. Those are two separate things to me when I'm listening to music. Ultimately, I found that I was baffled and frustrated by this album for the following reasons. It's the title track, Earth Mother. Now, it's an original composition, and the other compositions are split between original and basically tracks which are already out in existence by other people. So Earth Mother, it's just a really weird experience. I concluded once listening to it that it was both beautiful and discordant as a track at one in the same moment. And usually I would like that combination, but it's striking. It is noticeable that with that track, it kind of colored my experience of the album in total. And I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I completely got my head around it, but there seems to be an absence of the kind of black American jazz underpinnings. Now, when I say that statement in regards to jazz from other countries, that seems really bizarre, even to me, because I like world music. I like jazz from other regions on the planet where they give their own kind of regional flavor to jazz, and they don't necessarily conform to black American jazz. So I should like this, but somehow it's not a case of I didn't like it. I just still don't know how to process it, truth be told. I just don't know what to think of it. Now, as I said, I've listened to this album quite a few times, and let's say I've listened to it 5 times from front to back. And in terms of those kind of like cumulative experiences, I am no clearer to having a final conclusion about what I think about this album, apart from I respect it. I'm happy I've got it. It's the standard of musicianship is first rate. Let's not kid ourselves. It really is. But I just don't know what to think about it. I really don't. Kind of like my signing off notes, which I wrote about this album, would be is that I'll have to revisit this album at some point in the future, maybe a year or 2 down the line, and see if I can come up with any kind of final conclusion. So is that in itself, is that kind of like a testament of how interesting this album, that's something to be celebrated in the sense of, even with quite a few listenings, you're still picking up more and more information, and you just can't come to a conclusion about it. It just, that's how special it is. I'm choosing to see it that way. I think of it as a challenge, and I will come back to this album. But like I said, have a listen for yourselves, see what you think, see if you can come to a conclusion, see if you can aid me in my thoughts about this album, because yeah, I'm baffled. The tracks that I would recommend from this album would be Don't Worry About Tenor Saxophone, the title track Earth the Mother, and Round Midnight. The notables on this album would be Toshiyuki Dayatoku on piano, Tamio Kawabata on bass, and Ryojiro Furusawa on drums, who do a magnificent job. I can't deny it, they're first rate. Just can't conclude anything about the album. I don't have the vocabulary at this moment to explain what I think about this album. It's just kind of baffled me. But yeah, have a listen for yourself and let me know what you think. The third and final album today is a 1971 release by a gentleman called Mal Waldron, and the album is called First Encounter. Look how suave this gentleman looks with his kind of like low afro thing going on. Yeah, he's cool as a... Anyway, this album in a nutshell is absolutely beautiful. In overall terms, the delivery of sound when you are listening to it is done in a way where it's compositions where everything is stripped down to their bare essence. There's nothing here superfluous and they're just for garnishing type of reasons, just, you know, because you've got a big budget, you can have an orchestra in there. No, they kept it as stripped down as possible, and I certainly do appreciate that in jazz and music in general, that people are willing to take that chance. This album is not completely in the modal jazz style, so those who are interested in jazz and or of the more modal leaning, you might not enjoy this journey. But if you just like jazz in general and you are willing to give albums a chance and let them stand on their own merit, and you're not trying to pigeonhole them, and this is a worthy addition to anybody's vinyl collection, I would say. I would say from the production side of things, this is ideal material for testing the fidelity, how good your hi-fi is. So this can push it because it's pure, because it's neutral. Any kind of like, it's not an issue with hi-fis, but everybody builds their hi-fis slightly differently. So this is of a more neutral sound, so it will show up if you don't have the best quality hi-fi. It's gonna sound, you'll still get something out of it, but it's gonna sound a bit strange. Whereas the better system you have, the more subtleties you'll be able to extract from the vinyl. So yeah, it's definitely noticeable with this particular album. So, I wrote a note to myself, and it's quite funny. Not to sound too full of myself, when I think of the compositions and musicianship on display, it conjures up in my mind individual despair in an ultra-modern city where all basic needs are met. Jeez, I can't believe I wrote that. I'm kind of shocked at myself there. Okay, I see what I mean there. So, it made me think of, meanwhile I was listening to it, Demolition Man with Sly Stallone. And you might say to yourself, what the hell are you talking about? What's that got to do with jazz? Okay, when I mean a dystopian society in a ultra modern city, if you remember Demolition Man, the society that of the near future was incredibly clean. Nobody really on superficial level was going hungry or whatever. Yet people were still unhappy, and maybe this goes back to, I'm not a religious person, but it made me again think of tales of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, that even if you do give humans a perfect environment, they have, we as humans have a tendency to become unhappy in that environment because there's nothing to rail against. There's kind of like in a time of plenty, and you don't have to worry. Yeah, you just become lazy, you became disenchanted because you don't have to think, you don't progress. I think that's what I mean when I'm saying what I'm saying. I think I do. I'm talking and thinking at the same time. But yeah, that's what made me think of, yeah, like Demolition Man and Eon Flux. That, yeah, it is superficially a world that we would all strive for, but once we're there and all needs are met, it's human nature to be unhappy. It's human nature to rail against the system regardless, because that's what it is to be human. Now, who knows if Mr. Waldron thought about that when he was composing some of the tunes on here, or that was the album's intention. I'd say probably not, but that's how I interpreted it anyway. So, very enjoyable journey. So the tracks that I would recommend from this album would be She Walks in Beauty, and secondly, What's That? The notables on this album are Gary Peacock on bass and Hiroshi Murakami on drums, who both do an absolutely fantastic job. So please check out this album, have a listen, see what you think. Please consider commenting down below as to whether you think I'm just talking complete guff, or you have some sympathy with what I'm trying to articulate by way of my feelings on this album. Hopefully I didn't get too flowery there, but yeah, obviously this album got to me in a pleasant way. So yeah, that's the thing about albums. If they stimulate you to just chat wildly about them, then they can't be that bad. If you've got an album and you've got nothing to say about it, then is there really any point in having it? I'll have to think about that statement as well. So that was the third and final album for today. Thank you so much for joining me today and listening to my musings on some of the jazz albums in my collection. I hope you found it, at minimum, slightly entertaining. I hope so. Yeah, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. Please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting down below. More than happy to listen to your suggestions about what albums I should be looking out for, or if you have comments on my interpretations of what I think about an album, love to hear them. Hopefully you can clarify my mind on some of the things that I got confused about or maybe got wrong or whatever. Feel free to share those thoughts with me. So until the next episode, please look after yourselves, stay safe, and I will see you for the next episode. So until then, take care. Bye bye.